And the non-religious sciences he then subdivided into praiseworthy, permissible, and undesirable. So for example, he said history was permissible, but astrology was undesirable. And the praiseworthy sciences, according to Ghazali, that were necessary for society were obviously things like medicine, maths, and crafts. Now, another scholar which you may have heard of, Mullah Sadr, who was a philosopher of the Safavid era in Iran in the 16th century, he was the architect of what's known as the transcendent philosophy. He was so close, or he claimed to be so close to God, that he had direct knowledge, not through any intermediary. He claimed he had direct knowledge, for which he got into a lot of trouble in those days. But he's well known for a number of books. Amongst them, The Four Journeys is one of the most famous ones. And many of the more contemporary philosophers like Ayatollah Khomeini or Tabatabahi have based their work on Mullah Sadr's philosophy. A lot of his work has been translated from Arabic into English, and I would encourage you guys to perhaps look that up. Now, Mullah Sadr's comment on that tradition, the prophetic tradition about acquiring knowledge being obligatory, are very different from Ghazali. Now, he mentions 3 points, and he says the word ilm, knowledge or science, used in that tradition has a wide meaning. And one of these meanings is that whatever stage of knowledge one may be at, he is still required to go further. Salawat. So whether he's a scholar or whether he's an ignorant person, both of them have a requirement to advance in knowledge. So whether he's a beginner or a learned person, both of them have to go further in knowledge. So what the Prophet ﷺ means, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the tradition implies that no Muslim is exempt and cannot be excluded from the task of increasing their knowledge. And in terms of desirability, according to Mullah Sadr, there is no such thing as any knowledge is undesirable. Misuse of knowledge could be undesirable, but all knowledge, in his view, is worth having, whatever the source. The third scholar I wanted to mention here was Murtaza Mutahhari, who was a student of Imam Khomeini. Again, he's written a number of books. He's written one very good introductory book to Islamic sciences, published by the college where I did my master's, Islamic College of Advanced Studies. I think that's available on Amazon. And he's also actually not written, but there is a book which is available on alislam.org, which is a collection of 4 of his speeches, which he'd made on the event of Karbala. And it talks about some of the distortions that have crept into the narrative of Karbala over the years. Alislam.org, I would again encourage people to please go and refer to it. I think it will be very informative, not just for you, but also for your children to get that perspective. Now, according to Shahid Mutahhari, his view of division of knowledge was that the religious and non-religious aspect to him was flawed, because he said that may lead to a misunderstanding that non-religious knowledge is alien to Islam. And this was not consistent with the worldview of Islam, for a religion that claims to be a way of life and therefore self-sufficient. No field of knowledge can be excluded. So in Mutahhari's view, Islam's all-inclusiveness and finality as a religion demands that every field of knowledge that is beneficial for an Islamic society can be regarded as part and parcel of the religious sciences. So therefore, what we are saying is that the range of sciences is larger than what Ghazali had identified, and also consistent with the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. So let's now look at some of the verses of the Quran and the traditions to try and understand the extent of this knowledge. The Quran refers to knowledge or ilm in a very general sense. I'm going to quote 3 different verses. First one from Surah Zumar, verse number 9. Say, are those who know and those who do not know alike? Or in Surah Alaq, verse number 5, God taught man what he knew not. And then Surah Fatir, verse 27 to 28. Do you not see that God sends down water from the sky? Then we bring forth with it fruits of various colors. And in the mountains are streaks, white and red, and if of various colors, and others intensely black. And of men and animals and cattle are of various colors also. Only those of his servants endowed with knowledge fear God. God is almighty and forgiving. So in these verses, the phrase to focus on is those endowed with knowledge. Now that refers to ones who are aware of God's laws and the mysteries of nature and creation. Clearly, that includes our Prophet, and as we know, the Prophet's knowledge, the source of his knowledge was God himself, and that same prophetic knowledge passed down to his descendants and hence to the Imams. So if we now turn to the traditions, again, many of the traditions from the Holy Prophet refer to knowledge in a general sense. So there's a famous saying of the Prophet, seek knowledge even if you have to go to China. Or a second one which says, anyone who desires good of present life should seek knowledge. Anyone who desires good in the hereafter should seek knowledge. And anyone who wants to do well in this life and the next world should seek knowledge. So it's obvious from these traditions that Muslims should not confine knowledge seeking to just Sharia and theology, but gather whatever knowledge we can get from a number of, regardless of the source. Because clearly, China clearly was not a place for theological studies. Now, at this point, I've got a small anecdote which might illustrate how deficiency in my own knowledge led to a couple of problems. Back in 2004, my mother was ill in India, and me and my brothers were taking turns to go and visit her. And typically, we obviously used to take care of her and hospital visits and so on, but we still had a lot of spare time, and we decided to then make some investments in the real estate sector in India at the time. Partly through mum's du'as or timing, anyway, we did very well out of that. I talked about charity yesterday. We did make some charitable contributions, but perhaps on reflection, not as much as we should have done. So the next stage was, puffed with those good results from the Indian real estate market, we invested in Dubai. And this was back in 2006, 2007. And of course, that real estate investment has more or less lost its entire value. I mean, have you heard of a property investment that loses 100%? It doesn't happen normally. So the lessons out of that was, or to me, reflecting on that, was that the lack of detailed religious knowledge, therefore not accounting for the khums and so on properly, and also the lack of commercial knowledge in the Dubai sense. There may be other reasons in terms of the financial crisis and timing and so on, led to the loss in Dubai. So again, the point I was trying to make is that despite spending all this time and effort, because we didn't have the collective knowledge, we didn't benefit in this world or in the hereafter. So coming back to the rest of the speech, the Islamic scholars from the early centuries of Islamic civilization were at the cutting edge and leading in scientific thought. They rejected the separation of the aims of religion and the ends of knowledge as practiced by other traditions, because to them, both were directed towards understanding the unity of nature and the oneness of creation. So hence, religious coaching on one hand, rational training on the other, were considered a single discipline in religious schools and mosques in those days. So let's look briefly at why it was considered worthwhile to learn sciences in religious schools. So knowledge of a particular science is required to fulfill the duty that's prescribed by Sharia. So for example, welfare of people in society. So Muslims then need to study medicine or nursing. And therefore, by extension, all those sciences which benefit society in today's world have to be acquired by Muslims. So that in the current world stage could include pharmacy, IT, commerce, engineering, you name it. And secondly, the Quranic vision of society, an independent, thriving community of Muslims. To achieve this vision, Islamic society should have cultural, political, and economic independence, which in turn requires education, training, and specialization in every field, and creation of the necessary infrastructure in Islamic societies. The record, sadly, in recent centuries is that Muslims have left study of these sciences to others instead of leading it as the early Muslims did after the Prophet. And that has led to a decline in Muslim society, which I'll cover in more detail tomorrow. So I believe, therefore, that it's an obligation of Muslim scholars and researchers living in the West or the East to acquire the latest and most comprehensive scientific and technological knowledge. Now, why is gaining knowledge important? Well, it's important because the Quran invites mankind to study the system and scheme of creation and the cause and effect of all things that exist, plus the condition of living organisms. In short, all signs of God in the external universe and the inner depths of the human soul. The Quran enjoins in a number of verses, why don't you ponder? Why don't you meditate about all aspects of creation? And requires human beings to apply their God-given reason and perception to discover the secrets of nature. As we know, the Prophet from a young age and before the revelation started, used to spend hours meditating in the mountains around Mecca. So the importance of getting knowledge at a material level is it allows you to study nature and allows mankind to extract and utilize and benefit from the wealth of minerals or oil or other substances that are under the earth, under the oceans. And at a spiritual level, the more one progresses in understanding God's creation, the more His greatness and majesty becomes obvious. And therefore, the stronger becomes your inner faith in the Creator. This is the concept of ma'rifah, the deep recognition of God and His attributes, which should be the goal of most of us. Further, through meditation and contemplation, one could connect the inner sides of intuition and inspiration to realize one's connectedness to God. As God says in Surah Hamim Sajda, verse number 53, we shall show them our signs in the horizons and in themselves, till it is clear to them that it is the truth. So now let's turn to how we can acquire and apply in our current lives. We are obviously privileged to live in countries which have got established educational infrastructure and the opportunity to study a wide range of subjects. We should grasp them. We need to prepare and gain admission into Ivy League institutions because most of the top public sector and private sector roles go to those kind of students that qualify from there. We need to pursue acquisition of knowledge in all fields and seek to specialize. Now, just slightly digressing, the way scientific knowledge or indeed other knowledge progresses is in steps. So if you look at science, whatever the theories are there today may not stand as acceptable in the future. Once a publicly available theory is challenged by a better theory, the old theory is dropped, and then you've made a step into a new knowledge. Now that remains the borderline of knowledge until somebody comes up with another hypothesis or another theory that can better explain reality. So the type of association that existed between religious and scientific knowledge in the heydays of Islam, that needs to be reestablished. And for this to happen, we need to teach science in religious and theological centers, and in the same way, we need to teach religious sciences at universities. Now, the benefits of this are twofold. Muslim researchers and scholars will be aware of the Islamic worldview and the spiritual dimension of Islam and the connection with the God and the transcendent reality. And the religious scholars, in turn, in the seminaries, can use the latest scientific techniques for interpreting the Quran. I mentioned that each verse, or each Quranic verse has 70 layers of meaning. Some of them the Muslims have been able to interpret, but just like I mentioned scientific progress, future Muslims will come up with better interpretations of these verses and get to more of the hidden meanings. Because if the Quran claims that it is there for all times, then clearly it has to be a source of new information over the coming years. So not only do we need to train in the traditional subjects of medicine, engineering, law, and so on, but we need to now branch out into politics, media, PR, environmental studies, oceanography, and so on. So we especially need Muslims to learn political science, to take active role in local, state, and national politics, to influence local policy, state policy, indeed foreign policy. So in the current climate of Islamophobia, we need educated and articulate Muslims to make a contribution in the pressing problems that face the world: climate change, financial market regulation, gun laws in the US. And therefore, we need media-friendly expertise who can defend Islam without being defensive and articulate an intelligent response to superficial and non-contextual understanding of some commentators. I don't know whether many people saw the response of Raza Aslan to Bill Maher of CNN. I mean, we need more people like that who can go out to the media and actually make the other party look quite deficient. I think that's probably the politest word I can use. So Muslims trained in the West, cooperating with researchers in Muslim countries, communication links can be established between universities, a bit like the CERN project in Switzerland, which has got a number of different Western countries providing scientists. So such links and cooperation will, in turn, will actually turn Muslim majority countries to become self-sufficient. And in this context, I'm aware of a new Muslim initiative on social media. I don't know whether many people have heard about this. It's called Salam World. Now, it's a social network which hopes to connect Muslims worldwide. How it's supposed to do it is being tested as we speak. So, for example, you would have a student in Malaysia who posts something in his language, and somebody in Turkey wants to understand it. They'll be able to press a button and it'll translate it into the local language, for example. So a trial version of this Salam World is being tested in Bosnia, Turkey, Egypt, and Indonesia currently, and the company aims to launch globally in November, I understand. So at first glance, it may not be much different from Facebook, but the supporters of the multilingual and multicultural project say that one thing will be different is content. And it aims to create a safe space for Muslims, free from such things as pornography, gambling, and anything else that is against Islamic principles. So in tomorrow's talk, I will cover how in the space of a few years, Muslims created a rich and enduring civilization, how it was sustained and what led to its decline, and what possible action we can take today to catch up on lost ground. So with time pressing on, I wanted to now switch to today's Karbala value. So far, we have actually covered 5 different Karbala values. So this is the approach that I talked about, where Sayyid Jawad Naqvi has tried to analyze the event of Karbala from what values we can learn from it. So the 5 values we already talked about was covenant and responsibility, intolerance to oppression, dignity, infaq, and emancipation. All very important values that the Imam taught us. So today's value is patience, or sabr. So on several occasions in the Holy Quran, human beings have been commended to be patient. Rewards have been promised. And give the good news to the patient, who when a calamity befalls them, they say, surely we are Allah's, and to Him we shall surely return. So from the Holy Quran's perspective, we understand that patience is a great virtue for mankind. According to Imam Ali alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Patience should be adopted in 2 situations. Patience over what you dislike, and patience over what you desire. Now, Imam Hussein alayhi salam was a role model for patience. He showed us one very good example of patience is you cannot become patient by inaction. You have to come out and struggle in the way of God, as he did on the battlefield. Patience is the name of defending righteousness, or haqq, by taking risks of sacrificing one's possessions, even one's life, in the way of God. So brothers and sisters, tonight is the 6th of Muharram, and we remember the Imam's nephew and Imam Hassan's son, Qasim alayhi salam. He was repeatedly asking the Imam for permission, and the Imam said to him, my dear nephew, how can I permit you to go when I know for certain that death awaits anybody who's gone out to the battlefield? Your father and my beloved brother has entrusted your care to me, and my heart trembles at the thought of sending you to fight. But after appeals from Imam Hassan's wife, Lady Farwa, the Imam relented and granted him permission. Humayd ibn Muslim, who was one of the reporters from Ashura, relates, a youth advanced towards us with a shining face and carrying a sword in his hand. Amr ibn Sa'd said to me, by God, I'm going to attack him. I said to him, why do you have to do that? Is it not enough that the people, the army, have already completely surrounded him? But he said, by God, I'm going to attack him. So the brutality of these savages was inhuman. With this, he launched an attack against Qasim and did not return until he struck his head with the sword. Hazrat Qasim fell down from his horse and called out, "O uncle!" And Imam Hussein appeared like a hawk and fought with ferocity like a lion. He struck Amr with his sword while the latter tried to shield himself with his arm, which was severed from the elbow. The horsemen of Umar Sa'd tried to rescue Amr, but instead trampled him to death. When the dust settled, Hussein was seen standing by the head of Qasim alayhi salam, whose feet were stretched out on the ground. And the Imam said, "May the people who killed you be deprived of God's mercy, because the one who will take them to task on the day of judgment on your behalf will be your grandfather. By God, it is difficult for your uncle that you called out to him and he was unable to respond to your call. By God, the number of people prepared to kill us are many, and the helpers few." Then he carried his body by placing him next to his chest. Hazrat Qasim's mother came with Lady Zainab to look at her son's body. Words cannot describe the palpable pain of a mother's loving heart. She fell with a shriek and fainted. Our Imam, exhausted, resting his head on Hazrat Abbas's shoulder, was saying, my God, if my enemies wanted to kill me, they could do so. But what have my dear ones done that they slay them so mercilessly?" Hazrat Abbas softly said to him, "My master, now let me go as others have done. I'm now the commander of soldiers who are no more." Imam Hussein for a moment did not reply. Then he said, "Verily, we are from God, and unto him we shall return. Lanatullahi khawma salimeen." Brothers and sisters, would you please recite Surah Fatiha for Gulzar Abdul Hussain Hashimi, Ilji. Surah Fatiha. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa